Good afternoon. This is Tom Netting coming to you from Washington, D.C. with another in the series of American Association of Cosmetology Schools legislative and regulatory updates. Today is Tuesday, August 2nd of 2011. Today I'm going to provide you with a brief summation of the workings of Capitol Hill and the conclusion of the debt ceiling debate which took place today. President Obama signed the debt ceiling compromise into law earlier this afternoon following a debate and vote in the Senate earlier today in which the final vote was 74-26. This follows the vote in the House yesterday in which the House overwhelmingly passed 269-161 the debt ceiling bill. Included in that legislation were major issues of concern to the for-profit sector and to our students and schools. Most notably was the inclusion of $17 billion in additional new funding, mandatory funding for the federal Pell Grant program. In actuality, due to cuts to other portions of higher education programs, there was over $20 billion in savings or offsets developed through this legislation in education. $17 billion of which went to pay for fiscal year 2012 and fiscal year 2013 down payments on the shortfall and the Pell Grant program. Most notably and most importance is that these offsets, $10 billion in fiscal year 12 and $7 billion in fiscal year 13, provided down payment on the federal Pell Grant shortfall. The shortfall was running at $11 billion under the current fiscal year, but with the $10 billion down payment, the federal appropriators only need to come up with $24 billion, $23 billion in actual new funding, as well as $1 billion in additional funding in order to preserve the federal Pell Grant maximum at $5,550. And they've set aside an additional $7 billion as a starting point for a down payment on next fiscal year's Pell Grants. To be sure, $24 billion is nothing to scoff at. The ability to try and find the revenues or the funds necessary in order to pay to preserve the federal Pell Grant at $5,550 is going to be no easy task, and we will have to work through this year's appropriations process to ensure that Congress, in both the House and Senate, find the funds necessary in order to be able to ensure that students have a continuation of the current maximum of $5,550. In order to attain those potential savings and the potential offsets in order to preserve Pell, cuts were made to the elimination of the subsidies for graduate and professional programs, as well as the elimination of the interest subsidies provided for on-time repayment under both the prior FFELP loan program and the existing federal direct student loan program. What is important as well is that you look at the cuts that are supposed to be provided in the appropriations bill, there's two sets of cuts that are going to be needed. First, a cut of $1 trillion in the current federal fiscal year budget and appropriations process. Where those cuts will come from will be important and will play a role in whether or not the federal Pell Grant program can have the maximum maintained at $5,550. The second is a set of cuts that must be determined by what they're calling the Super Congress. It'll be a group of 12 individuals selected from the House and Senate who are going to be required by no later than Thanksgiving of this year to put forth recommendations for an additional $1.2 trillion in cuts. The goal being to hope to achieve over $2.4 trillion in cuts over the course of the budget bill, the debt ceiling bill just passed, and the work of this super congressional committee going forward, with the goal being that once they provide these recommendations, that Congress moves swiftly to enact them. If in fact that super Congress committee is unable to come up with a series of cuts, or if Congress chooses not to accept those cuts and votes in opposition to including all of those cuts, there will be a straight 6.7% cut across the board of all defense and non-discretionary and discretionary spending program and non-defense discretionary programs, which would mean probably in rough terms about a $3 billion cut to education programs, a cut across the board to all programs. We will continue to watch and continue to monitor this set of circumstances. AACS will focus some of our energy over the course of the next 3 to 4 months on helping to ensure and helping to work with the House and Senate to ensure that the additional $1 billion in offsets to the shortfall, as well as the necessary funding, is there to preserve the current federal Pell Grant maximum for students. On the regulatory side, there's been some recent developments as well. Just earlier today, the U.S. Department of Education published a notification in the Federal Register providing additional guidance on the reporting requirements under gainful employment. While institutions are still required to provide prior year information on students and information on their progression through school through the prior years effective October 1 of this year, for the fiscal year end 2011, the period from 2010's October 1 through September 30th of 2011, the department has provided an additional 45 days, making the reporting requirement for the most recent prior fiscal year just November 15th of 2011. To be clear, what this means is all the information on all of the students prior to the most recent fiscal year are still responsible for the institution to provide to the department October 1st. For the most recent fiscal year, October 1 of 2010 through September 30th of 2011, they're giving institutions an additional period of time to compress and consolidate that information and provide it to the department by November 15th of 2011. What we are also anticipating in the very near future is for the department to put forward a list of 7 to 9 experimental site proposals. One of those proposals will be a pilot program which for the first time provides institutions of higher education the opportunity to provide limits on loans on more than through the utilization of professional judgment on a case-by-case basis. This will for the first time provide institutions with the opportunity to group or consolidate whole cohorts of students to limit their borrowing. The devil of the details of that proposal has yet to be published. We will continue to monitor and track that as well as the other experimental site proposals and notify you in upcoming webcam videos as well as through the listserv. Also anticipated in the near future is Department of Education notification on the next round of federal negotiated rulemaking, likely to begin in the fall. The focus of those negotiations will center around student loan programs. AACS was actively involved in the regional field hearings that took place earlier this year, which were the precursor for those negotiations, providing testimony and actively participating in 3 regional field hearings in Charleston, South Carolina, as well as in other areas across the country. The last issue that I'd like to bring forward with this particular update is the desire to encourage you to meet with your members of Congress over the August recess. Congress adjourned today just moments ago in the Senate. Now both the House and Senate have adjourned and will not return to Washington, D.C. until September 7th after the Labor Day recess. In the very near future, your Government Relations Committee will be providing you with one-page handouts and additional information, encouraging you to contact your members of Congress while they're back in the districts and back in the state to provide them with additional information and concerns. Most notably, those are very likely to continue our focus on gainful employment and the desire to repeal that proposal and or make modifications to that proposal that are more beneficial to our students and our schools. Also probably likely discussions on the concerns with maintaining and providing access to the federal Pell Grant program, given the realistic complications and problems that would ensue if in fact the federal Pell Grant program maximums were reduced, requiring additional borrowing on behalf of students and all of the issues that would then arise, whether it be with cohort default rates and the potential for default, as well as the potential for additional loans to go again or have to be offset with regard to your gainful employment eligibility criteria. Once again, thank you for taking the opportunity and the time to review this video. More information to follow in the beginning of September. Have a great week and have a great August. Thank you.